I was reaching for a glass of water when my sister-in-law snapped. "Rachel, could you check on the oven? The appetizers might be burning." I wasn't the chef. I wasn't even part of the staff. I was the one who signed the paychecks last quarter. But no one here knew that. Not yet. We were at the Whitmore family estate in Sonoma, all designer shoes and vintage wine, where appearances mattered more than truth. I wore a plain black dress from a local boutique. They assumed I was help. I let them. Let them assign tasks. Let them forget my title, my degrees, my company. Let them talk down to me like I didn't belong here. Because tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, they'd find out that the vineyard they vacation in every year, it belongs to the girl they kept trying to forget. People assume you need legacy to own land like this. They think vineyards are passed down through grandfathers with calloused hands and monogrammed cufflinks. But mine began with a greenhouse behind a rented duplex in Western Oregon, a plastic roof patched with duct tape, a dirt floor, and my mother's hands planting basil between shifts. My mother, Cecilia Morgan, raised me on soil and strategy. She worked 2 jobs most years, one cleaning rooms at a roadside motel, the other tending local greenhouses no one remembered the name of. She'd come home with dirt on her jeans and sunburn on her neck, but somehow still managed to press my school uniforms and quiz me on math facts while dinner simmered. We didn't have heirlooms. We had grit. I never thought of myself as poor growing up, just determined. I wasn't the girl with designer shoes or summer camps in Vermont. But I was the girl who turned leftover library printouts into study guides and learned to code from books that still smelled like glue. I knew I wouldn't inherit anything, so I decided I'd earn it all myself. College was my first escape. I got into the University of Washington on a scholarship and rode the bus every morning at 5:45 a.m. to make my campus job at the research lab. I double majored in electrical engineering and sustainable systems, and I graduated in the top 5% of my class, something no one from my neighborhood had done in over a decade. That's where I met Daniel Whitmore. He was brilliant in a quiet, scholarly way, studied European political systems, wrote essays that professors passed around as examples. His family was old money Sonoma, estate dinners, tennis and pressed whites, the kind of place where everyone assumed their wine was better because their name was on the label. Daniel was kind though, gentle. He held my backpack when we walked and wrote me notes in the margins of used books. He liked that I was practical, said it made him feel grounded. When we got married, I didn't expect the fairy tale. But I didn't expect to disappear either. At our wedding, his mother, Elaine, smiled politely for photos but never once looked me in the eye. His sister, Claire, asked me if my mother would be bringing anything gluten-free, as if Cecilia was a caterer. Daniel didn't notice. Or maybe he chose not to. In the first few years, I let it slide. I was busy. I joined a clean energy startup in Seattle, helped design battery systems for off-grid farms. I traveled. I led pilot projects in drought-prone towns, and each time we visited the estate in Sonoma, I found myself retreating further into silence. They'd ask where I worked, then talk over my answer. They'd pour wine, then hand me a napkin like I should clean it up. They'd speak about family legacy like it was a blood right, and I, clearly, wasn't in their bloodstream. Still, I smiled. I took photos. I played my role. Because sometimes surviving in someone else's world is the first step toward building your own. Then came the moment that changed everything. It was at the harvest celebration 3 years ago. Daniel and I had just arrived late, having flown straight from a conference in Chicago. I still had my name badge on when we walked into the estate's courtyard, buzzing with string lights and string quartets. Elaine was near the entrance, surrounded by guests sipping wine older than my student loans. When she saw me, she leaned in to someone beside her and said clear as glass, "She's fine, just not polished. Doesn't really blend with this circle, you know?" She didn't know I heard her. But I did. I smiled, nodded, walked inside, and let that sentence burn into my memory like a brand. Not polished, not one of them. That night, I opened my laptop in the guest room while Daniel slept and started running the numbers. I had savings, stock options, early investments in solar storage tech that had quietly paid off. And just like that, a new idea took root. If they were going to make me feel small for not inheriting land, I'd simply buy the land they stood on. For the next 2 years, I shrank. Not physically. No one noticed the weight I lost or the way I started folding my shoulders inward in group photos. But something inside me got smaller every time I stepped into that estate and became the version of Rachel they expected: pleasant, useful, invisible. I was always early to help, but never included in the group photos they framed. I brought gifts from my travels: locally woven scarves, gourmet olive oil, handmade ceramics, and still got handed someone else's coat at the door. At every family dinner, Elaine would ask the other daughters-in-law about their children's schools, their home renovations, their Pilates routines. When she turned to me, it was always the same question. "So, are you still working on your little tech thing?" Little? She called my company Little when I was consulting with 3 counties on smart grid transitions. Daniel would wince sometimes. He'd squeeze my hand under the table like an apology, but he never corrected her. He never said, "Actually, Rachel just helped cut emissions by 28% for a mid-sized city." He never said, "She runs teams across 2 states and mentors interns who idolize her." No, he just smiled and told me afterward, "She doesn't mean harm. It's a generational thing. But harm doesn't have to be sharp to leave bruises. Sometimes it comes in whispers, the kind that wear you down, like water smoothing stone." At one spring gathering, I spent hours helping set the table in the Vineyards courtyard, arranging rosemary sprigs, folding napkins, checking place cards. When dinner began, there were only 14 chairs. There were 15 people. I offered to eat inside. No one objected. Later that night, Daniel said he hadn't noticed. I believed him, and that made it worse. There was the time I baked a citrus tart from scratch, Elaine's favorite, and left it in the kitchen with a note. At dessert, she praised the caterers, said it was the best they've ever done. Claire once called me remarkably grounded in front of a table of guests, then added with a laugh, "Must be the farm roots, right?" They didn't see me. Not really. But what they saw or didn't shape the way they treated me. And slowly, without realizing, I started treating myself the same way. I stopped correcting people when they got my title wrong. I stopped mentioning new projects, unless someone asked, and no one ever did. I stopped wearing heels or makeup to family events, telling myself I preferred comfort, when really, I was trying not to be noticed at all. I became a ghost in the house my husband came from. And I told myself it was fine because my real life existed outside their gates. But one afternoon, after a particularly grating lunch where Daniel's uncle joked I should start a compost blog or something, I sat in the garden alone and realized something gutting. I had let them define the borders of my belonging. And worse, I'd complied. I had allowed them to shrink me to fit their narrative. That was the last time I left Sonoma feeling powerless. Because that night, on the flight home, I pulled out my journal and wrote one sentence across the top of the page: "Don't fight to sit at their table. Build your own and buy the land beneath theirs." I didn't wake up one morning and decide to buy the land under their feet. It was slower than that, more strategic, like drip irrigation in dry soil, quiet, constant, intentional. It started with a vineyard in northern Oregon, not glamorous, not profitable, but undervalued and rich in potential. A colleague of mine, Alex, had left our energy firm to start a consulting group for sustainable agriculture. I reached out, casually at first, asking questions. He didn't ask why. By the end of that week, I had invested in a 12-acre property that needed solar panels and new irrigation, 2 things I knew intimately. From there, it became a pattern, a rhythm. While Elaine and Claire debated whether the new champagne flutes were too modern, I was calculating return on investment models between rainwater harvesting and wind power credits. I didn't do it to prove anything at first. I did it because I needed something of my own, something real. The vineyards I bought weren't trophies, they were quiet acres that fed people, hired locals, adapted to climate pressures. I made my name discreetly. My holdings were tucked into a shell company, Northwood Harvest Partners, a name I chose after the wooded path behind my childhood home. Within 18 months, Northwood acquired minority shares in 4 vineyards across California. Within 30 months, we were majority owners in 3. I never told Daniel, not because I didn't trust him, but because he'd never asked. He noticed the business trips, Seattle, Napa, Santa Rosa, and never questioned them. He assumed I was consulting for public energy boards, and technically, he wasn't wrong. But the silence between us became a kind of fog, dense, quiet, and hard to explain once you were inside it. Sometimes I'd come home from a site visit, hands smelling like soil and lavender, full of excitement about a new hybrid grape pilot, and he'd be grading essays about Cold War diplomacy, too distracted to notice the mud on my boots. And I stopped trying to bridge the distance. Instead, I built more. I hired a lean but brilliant operations team, 1 logistics planner, 1 agricultural analyst, and a part-time attorney who reviewed lease contracts on Sundays. I met with winemakers who'd been ignored by old money estates. I listened to seasonal workers about what broke, what rotted, what never got fixed. By year 4, Northwood was ready for its biggest acquisition yet, Whitmore Estate Vineyards. The estate Daniel's family called their summer home. The same one Elaine used for holiday galas and women's legacy luncheons. The one they'd mortgaged too deeply after 2 bad harvests and a costly irrigation lawsuit. They didn't even see it coming. The property had been quietly listed under a broker network that specialized in private legacy transitions. My team made an offer through a separate entity, Pine, Soul, LLC. Elaine never blinked when she mentioned at Thanksgiving that some outside buyer was circling like a vulture. She scoffed at the idea that their land would ever be in the hands of strangers. I smiled into my wine glass and signed the purchase agreement the following Monday. The contract included a clause that allowed legacy families to retain event access for 5 years, a detail I kept. Not out of mercy, but strategy. I didn't want to kick them out. I wanted them to arrive, just like always, completely unaware. Let them bring their wine, their place cards, their smug assumptions. Let them look past me like always. Because when the time came, I wanted their shock to be pure. Unfiltered. Vintage. The Whitmore estate had always felt untouchable. It sat on a gentle slope of sun-drenched hills, framed by lavender rose and Chardonnay vines that stretched like perfectly combed hair. There were stories that parts of the land dated back to the gold rush, that Daniel's great-grandfather built the stone wine cellar by hand. The family spoke of it like it was their birthright, not just a property. But birthrights don't pay bank loans. The first cracks were small whispers, mostly. Elaine fretting over a new zoning regulation, Claire hinting at some issues with cash flow during one of her yoga brunch ramblings. Daniel brushed it off as cyclical, saying all vineyards had tough years. Then the gala got downsized. Every summer, the Whitmores hosted a charity wine gala for a local museum board. It was their pride and social currency. But that year, the venue changed from their estate lawn to a rented hall in Santa Rosa. Elaine said it was for easier parking. I knew better. Then came the bigger fissure. The estate lost its lawsuit over a water diversion system they'd installed illegally 2 decades ago, something Elaine once bragged about as a clever little workaround. The court didn't agree. The fine was steep. The repairs were worse. They tried to settle quietly, but settlements don't come cheap. So they did what proud families do when no one is watching. They sold. Discreetly, through a private legacy transfer agency. The listing was quiet, hidden behind corporate speak and a non-disclosure clause that would have made a hedge fund blush. But not quiet enough for me. By the time their broker reached out to Pine Soul LLC, we were ready. My team moved quickly. Inspections, valuations, counteroffers. The estate was over-leveraged. Their desperation showed in the concessions. I made sure the event access clause stayed intact. 5 years of legacy family gathering rights, the document read, up to 4 seasonal events annually. It was perfect. I didn't want revenge. I wanted ritual. I wanted them to keep coming year after year, unaware that the soil beneath their champagne flutes now carried my name. Daniel found out about the sale from a group text Claire sent, full of passive-aggressive optimism. New ownership could be great, she wrote. Maybe they'll actually fix the roof in the north wing. He read it aloud, then laughed. Can you imagine? Strangers running the estate? I just smiled and kissed his cheek. I don't know what felt sharper, his laughter, or the ease with which I stayed silent. I returned the next summer like nothing had changed. Same suitcase, same plain cotton dress, same cautious smile when Elaine hugged me with both arms but none of her heart. The family gathered as they always did, clinking glasses, greeting old vineyard hands like royalty, congratulating each other on, well, being each other. Claire had dyed her hair, champagne blonde. Uncle Grant brought a new girlfriend half his age and twice his ego. Daniel helped unload wine cases like he'd never missed a harvest. No one noticed when I stepped aside to take a phone call from Ethan, the new estate manager I had handpicked 6 months ago. Welcome back, boss, he said. I smiled. Let's give them the weekend, then we start. Inside the house, everything looked the same, the oil portraits, the dusty china, the family crest engraved on silver napkin rings. But beneath the surface, every contract, every title deed, every security code had changed hands. Into mine. The kitchen staff wore new uniforms, sustainably sourced cotton with a new logo embroidered on the sleeve, Northwood Harvest. Claire didn't even blink. She thought it was a new sponsor. On the second night, while we were setting the long table under the vineyard trellis, Elaine handed me a stack of place cards and said, Rachel, dear, would you mind putting these out? You always do them so neatly. No, please, no hesitation. I took the cards, laid them one by one. Mine, as always, was at the far end by the fan, near the server's entrance. Nobody noticed. That was the point. At dinner, someone made a snide comment about the new estate manager being a bit too modern. Another complained about the changes in wine inventory. No more comp cases? Uncle Grant huffed. Daniel leaned in, chuckling. They're probably being run by some spreadsheet, happy consultant now. I took a sip of water, bit into my roast chicken. Said nothing. They had no idea that every bottle on the table, every vine outside, every parking space and maintenance policy, all of it now bore my silent signature. And still, I played the ghost. Not out of fear. Out of control. Let them finish their wine. Let them make one last toast to themselves. Tomorrow, I'd remind them what power looks like when it's earned, not inherited. Dinner was set under the canopy of wisteria vines and hanging lights curated, as always, to look effortlessly elegant. Strings of conversation threaded down the long table, interrupted only by the occasional laugh or clink of fine crystal. The wine was Whitmore vintage, though now bottled under a new label. No one at the table noticed, or if they did, they assumed it was a rebranding. Daniel was seated beside me, sipping a 2015 Merlot and recounting some anecdote about a colleague who mistook Napoleon III for Napoleon I on a midterm. I was smiling, nodding, but not listening. My hand was on my lap, phone buzzing silently. One word from Ethan. Ready? I glanced through the hanging vines, caught sight of him in the distance, standing just outside the stone arch that led to the private dining patio, a wine steward by his side, notes folded in his hand. I replied. Do it. Ethan stepped forward. He tapped his spoon against his wineglass, once, twice. The sound rang clear through the evening air. Slowly, the table quieted. Heads turned, laughter dimmed. Good evening, everyone, Ethan began, his voice calm, steady. I hope you're enjoying your dinner. Before dessert is served, we have a brief announcement from estate management. Elaine arched an eyebrow. Claire leaned back in her chair and pulled her shawl tighter. Daniel kept his glass halfway to his lips. As many of you know, Ethan continued, the estate underwent a change in ownership earlier this year. While much of the transition was kept private to ensure a smooth handover, We're now honored to share the name of the principal owner, the woman whose vision is behind every improvement you've seen this weekend." He paused, looked directly at me. My chair scraped lightly against the stone as I stood. Ethan smiled. "Please join me in recognizing Ms. Rachel Morgan." Silence. No gasps, no clapping, just stunned, open-mouthed silence. I stepped forward, heels clicking like gavel strikes on stone. Claire blinked slowly, like her mind couldn't process what she'd heard. Uncle Grant set down his fork with a dull clatter. Elaine's wineglass tipped sideways, crimson liquid blooming across her ivory tablecloth like a slow-moving bruise. She didn't even notice. Daniel turned toward me completely still and said nothing. His eyes locked onto mine like he was seeing a stranger. I reached the head of the table. Elaine's usual seat. I didn't sit. I didn't need to. I picked up the microphone Ethan had discreetly set there. I looked at them each one slowly, deliberately. And then I smiled. "Don't worry," I said, voice calm, clear. "You're all still welcome here." A pause. Just long enough for them to feel it. Just like everyone else now. I let the silence thicken, let them choke on the sudden equality they'd never imagined. "No more legacy discounts," I added. "No more backdoor bookings. No more family, only wine shipments. This is now a working vineyard and a public one. Your names no longer move mountains here." Still no sound. Just a kind of quiet collapse, like glass shattering behind closed doors. Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it again. Elaine tried to smile, but it came out warped, strained like someone wearing pearls over panic. I handed the mic to the pianist. He nodded, struck a single low note on the keys, then transitioned into something soft and distant, almost melancholy. I turned and walked away before anyone could rise to their feet or fake applause. The gravel path crunched beneath me. Each step felt lighter than the last. By the time I reached the courtyard, I could finally exhale. For the first time in 10 years, I had spoken without asking permission. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't pointed fingers. I didn't need to. The truth had already done the work. The woman they forgot to include in dinner photos. The woman they asked to pass the napkins, to fix the place cards, to check the oven. She now owned the deed. 2 nights later, I stood behind the curtain of the Vineyards event hall, listening to the soft hum of string instruments and the clinking of champagne flutes. The cocktail reception for legacy families was a tradition. Usually, Elaine would give a short speech about community, heritage, and upholding the Whitmore name. This year, she wasn't invited to speak. This year, I was. I waited until the room settled, until the servers began their final lap, collecting empty glasses and laying down coasters with the new logo Northwood Harvest embossed in soft gold. Then I stepped onto the small wooden platform beneath a warm halo of light. A few heads turned. Then a few more. Conversations halted mid-sentence. I tapped the microphone. "Good evening." Polite silence. Tense. Brittle. "Some of you already know me," I continued. "Some of you thought you did." A few tight chuckles. Nervous glances. I advanced to the next slide. On the screen behind me, a clean aerial rendering of the vineyard's southern end, reimagined with new trails, cabins, and a glass-fronted wellness center surrounded by lavender fields. "We'll be expanding operations in the spring," I said. "New cabins, sustainable upgrades, a wellness center focused on agricultural healing and mindfulness. We're also adding a community dock for lake kayaking programs open to local families year-round." Claire straightened in her seat. Uncle Grant squinted. Daniel stood at the back, half-shadowed. I clicked again. The next slide displayed a name etched onto a stone plaque. "The Cecilia Morgan Fund." Elaine visibly leaned forward. "It's named after my mother," I said. "She cleaned motel rooms for 16 years. She raised me on her own, with nothing but a greenhouse and grit, and she taught me that respect is earned, not inherited." The room chilled. Elaine's expression froze, a smile collapsing behind her eyes. Claire blinked, slowly, like she had misread the words. Daniel's hand twitched. but I didn't look away. I clicked to the final slide. A title: Private Lease Review, Summer Season. Beneath it, a list of initials and parcel codes meaningless to most, but not to them. We'll also be reviewing all long-term private lease agreements, I said casually, like discussing weather, especially those obtained through outdated personal arrangements. The room went still. Grant had 2 properties, both leased through handshake deals in the 90s. Claire's husband held another under a corporate shell. Elaine had been subletting the guest cottage illegally to a luxury travel agency for years. I didn't need to say names. They knew. We want this land to serve its community, I said, voice level. And to do that, it can't continue to serve privilege under the table. I stepped off the platform. The pianist picked up a soft jazz standard background noise to cover panic. As I walked through the crowd, no one stopped me. Claire's lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came. Uncle Grant glanced at the screen, then at his phone. Elaine clutched her pearls literally. Then came Marcus, Daniel's cousin. "Rachel," he said, hurrying to catch up. "Hey, can we talk?" I paused just long enough to let the pause sting. "Sure," I said. "You can book an appointment through guest services just like everyone else." And I walked away. Outside, the night was cooler than usual. The moon hung low over the vines. I stepped into the dark, heels crunching gravel, breath steady. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting to be noticed. I wasn't performing. I wasn't shrinking. I was rewriting the rules, and this time, I was the one holding the pen. By morning, the emails began. First came Claire. A carefully worded message with the subject line, "Misunderstanding." She wrote about family legacy, how she assumed the lease was grandfathered in, how she was always under the impression that subletting was allowed for longtime members. I forwarded the message to legal. By noon, Claire's voice memo arrived 5 minutes long, with the word "mistake" used 7 times, "tradition" 4, and "please" whispered twice. She had earned over 40,000 in sublet profits the past 3 years, none of it reported, all of it in violation of the lease terms. I didn't reply. I simply instructed my team to forward the data to the State Department of Revenue, accompanied by a quiet recommendation for a forensic audit. 3 days later, she received a formal request from the state. I didn't gloat. I didn't even tell her. I just forwarded her a list of trusted CPAs with a simple note. "You'll want someone thorough." Then came Uncle Grant. He'd been using his 2 properties as private tasting rooms, meaning he charged select guests under the table while still using estate utilities and resources. He hadn't paid proper site fees in over a decade. I didn't revoke his lease. I gave him 30 days to vacate, then transferred the property to a nonprofit that runs therapeutic retreats for veterans. The team moved in by July honest. His voicemail came in that night, full of disbelief. "Rachel, honey, this has got to be a mix-up. I mean, we're family." I didn't answer. Because family, to him, was only sacred when it served him. And then there was Elaine. She showed up without warning, no call, no appointment, just appeared in my office lobby wearing her usual pearls and a blazer too stiff for July. "I just want to talk," she said, smile painted perfectly, woman to woman. I nodded toward my office. She sat down and launched into a monologue about image, about the importance of unity, about what people might say if the family fractured publicly. "This isn't about me," she said, folding her hands. "It's about Daniel." That was when I opened my desk drawer. I pulled out an envelope I had prepared the moment escrow closed. Inside were documents. Emails from 3 former employees. Sworn statements detailing inappropriate comments Elaine made to junior staff. One calling a young intern a mouthy little thing in writing. I had settled those cases quietly when I acquired the estate, offering apologies, severance packages, and letters of support for their future employment. I handed her the envelope. Didn't say a word. Her smile cracked. Her hands trembled. I didn't know those had been filed," she said quietly. "They hadn't," I replied. until I asked. She opened her mouth, then closed it. This isn't about threats, Elaine, I added. It's about truth. If you ever go public, paint yourself the victim, this will go public too. I hope we understand each other. We did. She stood slowly, nodding, and left without finishing her sentence. I didn't feel victorious. I felt clear. This wasn't revenge. It was clarity. Boundaries, enforced with grace and steel. And Daniel? He never fought me. Not once. After the announcement, he spiraled. At first it was quiet, longer walks, distracted dinners. Then came the long conversations neither of us had dared to start for years. Why didn't you tell me? He asked one night. We were sitting on the porch overlooking the vineyard, a bottle of wine untouched between us. Because you never asked, I said. I thought I didn't need to, he replied, and his voice cracked in a way that made me want to hold him and push him away all at once. That's the problem, I said. You didn't think you needed to. There were tears. Long silences. Late-night unpackings of 10 years of avoidance, placation, and polite distance. In the end, I said something I hadn't realized until the words left me. I didn't stay because I was waiting to be accepted by your family. I stayed because I hoped one day you'd see me, not stand beside me at dinner, not say the right things after the fact, but really see me. And now? He asked. Now I see myself, I said. And that's enough. He moved out a few weeks later. Quietly. Respectfully. Not enemies. But no longer partners. And, somehow, that hurt less than I thought it would. Because I wasn't walking away bitter. I was walking away whole. 3 days later, I woke before sunrise. No alarm, no emails, just instinct. The house was silent. The kind of silence that didn't ask for permission, it just wrapped around you. And held steady. I brewed coffee, barefoot, hair tied back, wearing the same oversized sweatshirt I used to wear in college. There was something sacred in the ordinariness of it. I stepped onto the dock with a mug in hand, and watched the mist hover over the lake like it, too, was learning to let go. For the first time in a decade, I felt like I wasn't holding my breath. Not for an invitation. Not for approval. Not for someone to notice me at the table. Just stillness. And it was enough. The vineyard below was quiet, rows of vines lined like brushstrokes against the hills. Somewhere beyond them, crews were preparing for the wellness center construction. Plans were in motion, roots expanding. I wasn't waiting to be accepted anymore. I was deciding what came next. Later that morning, I walked the grounds with Ethan. We talked about rebuilding the east greenhouse, the one that had collapsed during last winter's storm. I told him I wanted to name it after my mother. He nodded without needing an explanation. Staff passed us and smiled, not out of fear or obligation, but because they finally knew who I was, and because I saw them back. There was no more pretending. No more shrinking to fit a room that was never meant to hold me. That afternoon, I drafted a letter to the estate's long-term employees, the ones who had worked under 3 generations of Whitmores and been forgotten in every newsletter. In it, I thanked them. I told them this land wasn't just shifting owners, it was shifting values. And if they ever wanted to pitch an idea, a memory, a lesson that had been overlooked, my door was open, always. I signed it with my full name, not as a formality, but as a promise. Rachel Morgan. Owner, Northwood Harvest. A week later, I stood in the great hall alone. The long wooden table, polished, regal, once a symbol of every room I didn't belong to, was empty. Sunlight streamed through the cathedral windows, casting gold across the chairs where they once sat, laughed, excluded, corrected. It used to be their table. Now it was mine. Not metaphorically. Legally, completely, unequivocally. And strangely, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt peaceful. I pulled out a chair near the head, not Elaine's old spot, not Daniel's, but the one near the window, the one I was never invited to sit at. I rested my hands on the smooth wood and remembered every time I was handed someone else's napkin. Every time I was spoken over. Every time my worth was measured in how quietly I served. They used to speak about legacy like it belonged to them, inherited, embossed, untouchable. But legacy isn't what you inherit. It's what you leave behind when you finally stop asking permission. Outside, a group of schoolchildren toured the vineyard. One of them pointed at the irrigation panel I helped design 3 years ago, the one that cuts water use by 60% and keeps the vines alive through harsh California summers. They didn't know my name. Not yet. But they would see the orchard I planted next spring, the scholarship program opening this fall, the community garden where the tennis court used to be. And they'd know that someone had turned this place into something more than a backdrop for cocktail dresses and Christmas cards. Back inside, I walked the length of the table, trailing my fingers along the edge. I thought about Daniel. We still talk sometimes, not about the estate or the divorce paperwork, but about books, mutual friends, memories softened by time. There's no bitterness, only space. And finally, honesty. I thought about my mother. What she would say if she saw this place, the gallery with her name etched in glass, the old greenhouse now restored with new solar roofing. She never saw herself as a woman of power, but her hands built my foundation. And I thought about the version of me who first walked through these doors 10 years ago, clutching a salad bowl, smiling too wide, praying not to spill anything on the linen napkins. She thought that if she was quiet enough, polite enough, helpful enough, she'd be allowed to belong. If I could speak to her now, I wouldn't tell her to be louder. I'd tell her, you were never meant to fit into their world. You were meant to build your own. And you did. Before I left the room, I turned back one last time. Not to remember, but to anchor the truth that when they refused to give me a seat, I built the table. And it's not just mine. It's open. To the people who work hard. To the ones overlooked. To the women like my mother, invisible to history, but fierce in impact. So, let them raise their glasses elsewhere. I'll be here building something that doesn't need their name to matter.